Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar, SharePoint File Migration. Today, we're going to dive into a complex migration case study that illustrates all of the steps you need to take when moving to a common SharePoint file system. If your situation is not that complex, don't worry. We're going to be going through the steps for any migration, and we will be sharing practical illustrations and examples of challenges you can overcome. And we're going to talk about why it makes economic sense to move from a file server to a cloud-based product like SharePoint, and why it also makes sense to consolidate your systems if you have developed ad hoc over time and have multiple file sharing platforms that may take time from your staff and make them less effective at their work. Of course, accessing files remotely involves security best practices too, and we know that any migration is a really big change with a lot of impacts. So we'll also talk about change management to help your migration be more successful. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT, and I'm the moderator today. I'm very, very happy to hear from our experts. So Norwin, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Norwin Herrera. I'm the IT Business Manager Team Lead, and I've been in Community IT for 3.5 years.
And Robin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Robin Harris. I'm a cloud technology engineer here at Community IT. That means basically I work on migration projects, helping our clients move from whatever platform they're on into SharePoint.
And my name is Carolyn Woodard. I already introduced myself, but before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, a little bit about us. We are a 100% employee-owned managed services provider, and we provide outsourced IT support. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish their missions through the effective use of technology. We are big fans of what well-managed IT can do for your nonprofit. We serve nonprofits across the United States. We've been doing this for over 20 years, and we are technology experts. We are consistently given the MSP 501 recognition for being a top MSP, which is an honor that we received again in 2022. So we are vendor agnostic when it comes to our clients, in that we don't have agreements with vendors, so we don't have motivation to put clients in a tool because we get some kind of benefit from it. But we do think of ourselves as a best of breed MSP, managed services provider. So we know the landscape of what tools are available, are reputable, and are widely used, and we make recommendations for our clients on that basis. So today we'll be talking about a single tool from Microsoft, SharePoint, which is a cloud platform that many nonprofits are using. So we're giving you insights based on our experience. There are a lot of reasons why nonprofits might choose to be a mostly Microsoft organization. And once you make that choice, Microsoft makes so many products that integrate that it can influence your choices after that. So if that describes your organization, you've come to the right place. We do support Google Workspace and Mac shops also, and we have some webinars on our website about managing those tools or even managing a hybrid environment. So it can be done, but today we're going to focus on this tool, SharePoint, why to use it, and how to migrate your files into SharePoint and get your whole organization using a common cloud-based file sharing system. All right, so our learning objectives for today are to learn about SharePoint and what it can do, and learn the best steps and best practices for a SharePoint migration project, and to discuss change management tips. So to start off, we're going to have a poll. So we want to know a little bit more about you, the people who are in the webinar with us. So what size is your nonprofit based on staff? And the options are 1 to 10 staff members, 11 to 25, 26 to 100, over 100 staff members, or really not applicable. So Norwin, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
can you go ahead and read the results?
Yes, 1 to 10, 15%, 11 to 25, we have 27%, and then 26 to 100, we have 33%, and more than 100, we had 21%, and not applicable 3%, which is one person.
One person, yeah. So thank you. That really helps us. Thanks for sharing that. I think we have, it almost looks like a perfect bell curve. So we have a bunch of people from organizations there in that middle size and then some on either side. So that's really helpful for us. Okay. So next, we would like to learn a little bit more about you. We have a second poll. How long have you used SharePoint? So your options are you're thinking about starting it this year. So you're not really on SharePoint yet. Just started this year. So you're new, or maybe you're in a migration right now. Started seriously in 2020. I think a lot of us moved to remote work or hybrid work. So that may have been when you started really using SharePoint to access your files. Have always used SharePoint or not applicable. And I'm going to go ahead and share these results. So Robin, can you see that? Would you like to read the results?
Yeah, so 29% are thinking about starting this year. 10% just started this year. 39%, as we expected, started in 2020. 19% have always used SharePoint, and just one person non-applicable.
Makes sense. Thank you again so much for sharing that and letting us get to know you a little bit. All right, so I'm going to move on to talk a little bit more about SharePoint and how it fits in the context of other Microsoft Office products. So this graphic I love. It's a periodic table of Microsoft products. No wonder people get overwhelmed. It's a little bit overwhelming. You can see SharePoint and OneDrive are here in this part of the illustration. We're going to talk about OneDrive in a little bit. And you can see this layer of documents you may be more familiar with. You can create and work on Word documents, Excel, PowerPoint. So it used to be that when you created, worked on, or saved, for example, a Word document, you saved it locally to your own computer. And if you remember, you used to have to hit save to make sure that your work was saved. Or then you maybe saved it locally in your office on a server that maybe lived in a weird closet full of computer stuff. Maybe there was a fan or special air conditioning in there. So when we all moved to working in the cloud online, those files still needed to be shared somewhere. So in Microsoft's universe, they are stored and shared in SharePoint, which is shared folders. So a little history, Microsoft first thought of SharePoint as a way to create websites. So some of the terminology still sounds like you're making a website. From the beginning, you could create a SharePoint site with permissions just for an internal audience, almost like an intranet, or you could make it be public as a website. And it quickly became apparent that since Microsoft had made it so easy to store files in internal websites, companies could just use SharePoint just to share files, not whether or not they thought of it as an internal website. And that functionality kind of took over the tool. But some of the way Microsoft talks about SharePoint can still sound like you're using it to build websites. So that adds a little bit to the confusion in the lingo. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about what SharePoint does. So you can create, store, and share content on the web from wherever you are. It is cloud-based. It's accessible from anywhere. You can share files within your organization or with people outside of your organization, giving them permission to edit or just to view. And you can share files and or work collaboratively using email, using the share link capability that's in the file itself. But there are some things that SharePoint is not very good at doing. So Robin, you want to talk about some of the things that it's not great at?
Right. So SharePoint is not good at storing database content like your financial software, such as QuickBooks, larger files, media files, Adobe InDesign, Revit, CAD, for example. Getting all the colleagues consistently using SharePoint and OneDrive also requires commitment and training.
Exactly. So I think that's one of the things we run into a lot is even if the tool is technically working, getting people using it can be a struggle for nonprofits. Right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about how you share files in SharePoint. So giving an example of the PowerPoint that I created for this webinar and that we were sharing on SharePoint to work on it collaboratively, Robin and Norwin and I. So on your file, you'll see several features across the top. And if you're confused about any of these functions, it can be a good idea to ask around at your organization. So you may have a colleague who's really good at SharePoint who can answer your questions. You may have some training materials that you missed. You can Google it if you have questions. So we're just going to cover basics around file sharing today. But one of the good and bad things about SharePoint is that it's really customizable. So your own instance of SharePoint may have some quirks. It might look a little different than this, but in general, here are some of the basics. So at the top, you'll see that your file is shared and saved, and you can click on that link to see where the file is located. So it'll show you the parent folder. You can also see previous versions of it. So if you need to wind back, you did something that you want to undo, or there's a previous version that you think is better, you can click on that link and see them. Also at the top left of the top bar, you'll see that autosave is turned on. Every once in a while, you'll see it kind of whirring along, and that means it's saving a version. So you don't have to keep clicking save every time you change something. And then at the top right, you'll see there's a button to share the file. So you can choose who to share it with and how to share it. So you can share it as a link. You can put an email in there and send it directly to the person that you want to share it with via email. You can make you can send a copy, and you can also create a link, a URL, and you can make a copy of that and share that. So you could share that through an email that you write, or you could share it on Teams with your colleagues there, or anywhere that you wanted to share a URL. So here's where you see that you can make that link. And then once you click on that, it'll open it, and you can see that you can edit whether the person can view it or will be able to edit it. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it looks like when you're looking at a document. Robin, I think you were going to talk a little bit more about how you might access SharePoint and what we would recommend.
This is what a hub looks like. This is where you would actually go to access the various sites on your SharePoint. For instance, this one is showing where you could click on each of these buttons, which are links to human resources or information technology or workplace. But yes, this is
like the intranet. This is part of it.
This is an example of
basically using SharePoint as an intranet. They in this particular case, for example, this organization plays their human resources communication site. They also have an information technology site, which is the IT, and they have another place that is called Workplace. So they basically are creating into their SharePoint a little piece of intranet, but soon you will see the integration with SharePoint. Okay, that's exactly what you see right there.
Exactly. And then we also, because Microsoft always has 20 ways to do anything. So this is an example again from me. When I was saving this PowerPoint, I got to, you can choose which folder you're going to save it in and where you're going to put that. So just like your File Explorer, but it's the shared folders. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about OneDrive and shared libraries in SharePoint. And it's really, really confusing. I think we got several questions about this in the registration questions. So Robin, did you want to take on a little bit talking about kind of how we think about where you should share something or store something, and what our recommendations are?
Right. People make personal decisions, and departments do their own thing. If people are using the personal OneDrive or Google Personal to store their documents for the organization that they share the folder, we address the organizing to set up rules. Everything on your company laptop belongs to your company, but your personal documents are stored in OneDrive, which is your personal slice of SharePoint. SharePoint are documents that are shared amongst you and your department or across the entire organization. Teams is a method an app that we can use to access SharePoint as well.
And I know you talked about it previously, like when you think about what you're storing in OneDrive and whether they're actually personal documents, like you have to think about should you be storing personal documents on your work laptop? And so that's like a little bit of a separate question. But yeah, I think that's a great way to keep it straight. So your OneDrive is yours, but you can share those files with other people from your OneDrive. So again, it's like Microsoft gives you 20 different ways to do the same thing, and it can make it really seem a lot more complicated. Let's move on and talk about more about the lingo. So there's some common SharePoint, lingo that again might be a little bit confusing. So Robin, did you want to talk about just the way we talk about SharePoint?
Yes, so as Carolyn alluded to earlier, a lot of the lingo is related or sounds a lot like websites. So SharePoint is made up of sites. A site is a storage space in the SharePoint storage system, the Microsoft storage system. And you can have two types of sites, Teams sites or communication sites. The Teams site is not in Teams. Teams is a separate app. Thanks a lot to Microsoft for making that confusing. But a Teams site is one that is for collaboration. A group is a collection of users who have access to a site. If you create the group or if you create the site, the group automatically is created that gives access to that site.
So I think in that screenshot that we showed earlier with the hub, and you had the 3 different areas, there was an HR area, an IT area, and a workplace area. So each of those are sites. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right.
They each lead to sites that have the permissions set for who has access to that site.
And so each of those sites would have a group associated with it. So like if you were in HR, everyone in the HR group would have access to everything in that HR site, that you would go to that start page and then click on HR site, and then it would show you all the folders.
Right.
Some more lingo, Robin.
Yes. So that slide, referring to the slide that we discussed, was a hub. It's a special communication site that's used to navigate to other sites. If you are just starting out with SharePoint, you will be probably creating multiple sites, and this is a way to collect them all together and point to where those sites are. The screenshot from earlier is an example. It often is the start page, and your SharePoint may or may not have a hub. For just a couple of sites, you would not need a hub. A documents library is a container that stores files within the library. Are files and folders, just like in your File Explorer on your computer or Finder on your Mac. Permissions can be set at the file level, by folder, and by site. Permissions should be defined by the governance team. We recommend that members of sites have access to all the content on that site. It's a cleaner implementation.
And I know we talked a little bit earlier about, when we were preparing for this webinar, about like when that might come into play. Like before we showed that there was the HR site. So you might have a team like within HR that has even more specialized permissions, like some documents that can only be seen by certain people in HR. So you're saying that you wouldn't want to create different permission levels within that HR site. How would you handle that?
So if you have a folder that has just a handful of the members of that site that have access to just that folder, we recommend that you create a new site for that folder, out of that folder.
So some examples with that, like for your board maybe, or for like,
yes. For board
even
content. Yeah.
Could potentially be like one person in HR that has like special access that they need and they would have a site to themselves?
Yes, we often find this this type of situation in finance folders where payroll information may be in the finance folder, but you would not want everybody to have access. So you should create a payroll site that is only those folks that need access to payroll information.
That makes sense. I think when you think about it that way, it can make it more simple. It's a simpler, like you said, a cleaner implementation. So now we have a couple of frequently asked questions. So I'm gonna kind of ask you to give us a little bit of insight in this. So Norwin, can you do a migration without consultants? We got this question in registration.
Short answer is yes, but we have an advice for you. So if someone use someone internally or externally with experience with migrations who knows SharePoint well. Make sure the managers prioritize SharePoint time and recognize this is a big, important project. This is our best recommendation to you. So it's doable, but make sure that you have somebody who knows.
Yeah, so you need someone who's responsible for it.
Correct.
Over time, like not just for the migration, but then they're also going to be kind of managing as it goes forward.
Responsible, and also is empowered in the organization to make, the work, because you can have somebody that has the project on their workload, but if the person is not empowered, nothing is going to happen.
That makes sense. All right, so when should you keep using a physical file server, Robin?
Rarely. Cloud-based file sharing has become the standard and has economic and business advantages. It's also greener.
That's true. That's true. Yep. So is SharePoint in the cloud expensive, and is a migration expensive, Norwin?
Okay, moving to the cloud makes sense, right? Financially speaking, you will have a one-time cost and easier access versus the cost for server licenses and complicated access security via VPN. And also remember, physical servers have a life cycle. So after 5-6 years, you need to replace them. Replace them mean you need to pay for engineers to do the configuration, and then you gotta recycle that device, and also you have to purchase new licenses. So if you add up all those numbers every 5 years, it makes more sense to go to SharePoint, because SharePoint is less. Basically, you don't pay for SharePoint because it's included in your licensing that you are getting. If you want extra, then you pay extra.
Yeah, now I think that's a good reason for a lot of nonprofits to be using it, because they already have Office 365, so it's included in that. All right, a couple more frequently asked questions. So my organization doesn't have standardized file sharing now. Should we migrate? Robin, what do you think?
Ad hoc file sharing by different departments is an indication to your migration that your migration will need strong change management and strong training to get everybody on the same page.
So I think it might even be like an indication that yes, you should migrate. Like if you're going to organize your files anyway, you might as well use a migration to kind of prod that. So Norwin, is simplicity and consistency better in SharePoint organization?
I think it is, yes. Over engineering is a recipe for frustration and inefficiency. So we have to keep it simple. And the way to keep it simple is because SharePoint basically is similar to what you use when you use your file explorer. So you can have that sense of the same way of doing things. You know what I mean? You don't add an extra layer of knowledge to people. You just need to explain it. This is the way it works, similar to this one, and it will be much simpler.
Yeah, no. And is SharePoint secure? Robin, do you want to address that?
Yes, following Microsoft's built-in security features within the security and compliance stack, SharePoint is secure. Your logins are already in place, so you should use multi-factor authentication and single sign-on to access it. User training is key to keeping SharePoint secure. User training would include or should include keeping track of how you share documents and who you have shared them with. Any system can be insecure, and with strong training and change management, a single SharePoint is always more secure than multiple sites. That gets into trying to manage and keep track of many different sites that and their access.
Exactly. And I loved earlier when you were talking about the permissions being by site. And then you have a group that all have the same permissions. So not trying to manage lots of different permissions at different like levels, like just having the site be the organizer for the permissions. That also makes a lot of sense. Now we have, like our cybersecurity expert, Matt, is always saying that any system could be insecure. Like if you share your password with somebody, then, the system could be as secure as possible, but the people, it comes down to the people being able to use it securely. All right, so that was great. We've got a bunch of questions coming in. I'm going to hold them, so we're going to make sure that we have some time at the end to answer questions because we want to make sure that we get through the case study. But right now I wanted to go ahead and launch this another poll to let people in the audience tell us, where are you migrating from? So are you migrating from a physical file server? You're finally getting off and going in the cloud. Second option, are you migrating from a single other cloud file platform? Are you migrating from multiple other cloud file platforms? Are you migrating from multiple SharePoints to a single SharePoint? Are you, like it can get more and more complicated, right? Are you migrating from multiple offices with multiple platforms to a single SharePoint? Number 6 is maybe something else or all of the above, a little bit of everything. And the 7th option that you can give us is not applicable. So I'm going to share the results. And Norwin, can you read that for us?
Yes, I can. Physical servers, we have 10 people with physical servers still. Single other cloud platform, we have 6, which is 18%. Multiple other cloud file platforms, which is 12%, 0, and the next one, and the multiple SharePoint to single SharePoint. Multiple offices to multiple platform to a single SharePoint, that's a 0 too. And then something else, we have 29%, 10. And then 4 people and not applicable.
Okay, that makes sense. So maybe you're thinking about it or it's down the road. So
Right.
Thank you again for sharing all of that with us. All right, so next I'm going to move on to the case study part. The mission of the Chinatown Community Development Center is to build community and enhance the quality of life for San Francisco residents. It was begun in 1977 from 5 neighborhood grassroots organizations that were advocating for parks, housing, tenant rights, transportation, and recreation needs. And Chinatown CDC today provides multiple services and advocates for multiple neighborhood issues. They are at the forefront of community advocacy, planning, and affordable housing development in the city of San Francisco. So if you look at their website today, which I urge you to do, they're a phenomenal, amazing organization doing a lot of really wonderful things, but that's it. They're doing a lot of things. They provide lots of different services, and like many nonprofits, their teams are going in lots of different directions. This can be an asset, as many of the issues they're working on are interconnected. But it has also created a situation where many departments and teams don't necessarily coordinate organization-wide, particularly around where they were sharing their files and how they were storing them. So this is very, very common to many nonprofits. Not surprisingly, they experienced rapid budget and staff growth during the pandemic as they were called on to help their community through that crisis. The rapid growth and the shift to working remotely helped them decide that their file sharing needed to be consolidated and simplified. And again, I just emphasize that many of the challenges they experience are common to other nonprofits of any size. And we hope that this webinar will help you feel like you're not alone, and SharePoint can be really, really challenging. All right, so Norwin, I think you wanted to help walk us through some of the challenges that they face.
Yes, but before talking about the challenges, I want to say that in 2022, CCDC, I call it CCDC, Chinatown CDC, realized they needed to create a common file sharing system organization-wide as they were already using SharePoint, the classic version, because SharePoint has a classic version, and they were using that. And they have Microsoft 365. They selected SharePoint as their common platform to contract it, and then contracted community IT to do the migration. So we are helping them in the migration. So basically, this organization is so big that only one department can consider an organization, because you can have one department with like 40 people in one department. So, and then in different places, which is almost one organization. So the challenges they experience might sound familiar to some of you. And I'm gonna try to go through them really quick, right? Experience rapid budget and staff growth during the pandemic. At the same time, they have moved to remote work, and they needed access, right? And they have something very secure to access the server. So we were facing that challenge. And the moment that we saw that, we said, you know what, the best way to go is move to SharePoint to everyone. And they already had SharePoint. So it was more of plan the training, plan the migration, right? Then they have multiple locations. They have multiple departments. They have multiple file sharing platforms, including SharePoint, file server, and also Dropbox. And who knows what else? They might have, you know, their Gmail. Some people is using their Gmail to the Google Drive to share files as well. So it's very complex situation, right? They also have multiple sites within SharePoint, which is make it more complex, right? Because we have right now in the migration, we have the current people who's moving, and there is some people who still using the other version of SharePoint. So you have like two different systems working at the same time, which is no ideal to nobody, but we have to move them smoothly because they're so big, right? So there is a lack of existence, governance, rules, and documentation, because when they started doing this, it was only one department using SharePoint. So that department took the lead to move to SharePoint, use SharePoint, but there was never a governance on it. So they basically created their own space to collaborate and work. So this was a challenge, because we need to face the challenge and then give them a solution to that one. So they have different teams, departments, and they have free reign to create a file sharing option. Change management was essential to bring them together to make decisions organization-wide. And then obviously multiple previous consultants and soil decision-making without common coordination. This happens easily in larger organizations. So if your organization is big, maybe you can be like check almost in every single one of them, you know. So that's
I
what
think
can
even
say
some
about it.
smaller organizations might have some of these same challenges, where you have entrepreneurial people who have like chosen a file sharing that works for them or their department, and then trying to get everybody on a similar same platform can be really, really challenging. So do you want to talk a little bit, Norwin, about the steps for any migration?
Yes, correct. So this is something really interesting, because we're trying to make it simple for you to see it in the presentation, but in reality, it's a lot of moving pieces in there. Like, for example, the assessment is that we consider the first step, which is multiple one-on-one meetings with the department leads. So before you get into that moment of the assessment, you got to make sure that you have the right person for the department to take the leadership of moving and making decisions. So that's what's happening. So for example, I'm going to give you an example. You have finance team, right? There might be somebody in finance who is the most competent person to make that work, but basically that person is completely busy. But you can have a second person who has the knowledge and also can help with the migration. We need somebody to guide internally your department and also help us, because we are the team helping you to move the files. But we need to understand that when we move the files to the new location, we don't make a mistake. So everything has to be really, really clear. And that leads us to the next step, which is design and planning. So we need to consolidate a new structure, and then we have to have an agreement, and then we have to have a migration plan, meaning like, okay, we are ready to migrate. We know how it is. Every single folder goes from here to here, here to here, here to here, but also they know when is the day that the files are not going to be longer accessible? Because when we do the migration, like for example, we usually do migrations on Friday. So Fridays, 5 p.m., nobody can have access to the system because we're going to move the files. So basically we cut off any single access to the people, so they are not working. We have some people who's workaholic, and even though we tell them 5 p.m., they keep working 6, 7, 8 p.m. They're still on the server doing changes. So we tell them 5 p.m., then we migrate. And then we say, Monday morning, first thing we do is train you. So we're going to train you. We're going to explain you where your files move. And that is the next step, the migration. Agree on the days that we're going to train you, and obviously migrate everything. And then the post-migration thing, which is support, right? If there is somebody who say, I don't have access to my files, I lost my file, where are they? You know, we can help you because we know where they are. We made a mapping at the beginning, knowing this folder goes here and it moves here. This folder goes here and moves here. So we know exactly where your files are. And also, we can provide you support. We can help you to find your files. And also, we don't delete anything. We don't delete any files. So we just remove access and we leave it as a read-only. So you can see what it is in there, but you cannot touch it, you cannot modify it. And then if something needs to be moved, we help you and we move it. In a very simplex way. This is more complex than it looks.
Exactly. So we do have some more questions coming in. Keep adding your questions to Q&A. We'll get to them at the end. But we're going to move on to talk about change management. So we've talked a lot about what a big change this is for Chinatown CDC and for any nonprofit trying to migrate and consolidate their file sharing. So we do have some tips. We have some other change management on our website, but Robin, I think you were going to talk a little bit about what we've learned that can help organizations kind of manage their way through this process.
Right. So Community IT has some generic roadmap templates that you can use to help your change management and help manage your timelines. Think about the impact and staff deliverables as you roll out your plans to your staff. The link is here. It will be included in the deck when you once we're done. Leadership needs to prioritize a large IT project with far-reaching impact. We need to help staff take some things off of their plate, the staff that's going to be involved in this, just so that they can have time for this project. Leadership needs to lead by example, reporting on the migration, letting staff see them using and championing the common SharePoint. And we recommend that you start by forming a governance team. Giving them authority and time to prioritize is essential. This is something we probably realized a little bit later in the game for CCDC, but it is necessary. It is vital that you start off with a governance team.
This is the slide number 2. Identify champions, power user, give them incentives to share tips with the colleague through the brown bags presentation. This is very important because you can have some people against your project and you can have people pro your project. So if you identify those people who can help you in the implementation will be great. Then identifying training requirements. This is also very, very important. And work with human resources to implement them at the onboarding and in performance evaluations. This is another great a strategy, I will say, to make sure that people use SharePoint the way it's supposed to be for your organization. And then people will gravitate to the method they know. So if no one is checking, they use the new methods. They will not use them. Create evaluation points and rewards for the department and staff who are making the changes you want. And then give your project time and expect it to take time. You know, it's not easy. It's not simple to move from one platform to another one. Build in checkpoints and ways to communicate as timelines inevitable change. And it's better to do this project successfully than quickly. I think this is a good phrase to end the tip, because it's not about faster, it's about how effective you make it, so people understand that it's a tool you're given to your organization to make it secure, to make it collaborative, and also to keep it in one place. Okay, because this, I think there is a question about SharePoint and OneDrive. It's important to note that SharePoint is the collaboration space. OneDrive is your personal work folder. Okay, that's a very, very, very different thing. Your personal work folder, it's not your property, it's your company's files, but it's your personal space. And then SharePoint is the collaborative space that we have.
That's all great. Thank you so much. And I think, a lot of that, it's like kind of, well, it's not easy to see, but this is some of our experience and some of the things we pulled out of our experience, but it can be really, really hard to put that in place. So hopefully this webinar and referring back to some of these slides can give you some ideas of how to make your migration change management really happen. So I wanted to make sure that we left a lot of time for Q&A, and I think that we have. I'm gonna say, let's go to the questions that were asked. There's some that haven't been answered yet. So the first question was, is a site the same as a folder? And if not, what's the difference? I think we did kind of get at that, but Robin, would you like to just clarify that?
Yes, a site is a collection of folders and files. So a site, just like a website that you would go to that site and then see the content that is located on that site, which can be comprised of files and folders and files in folders.
Yeah, so the folders are in the site, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
All right, so how do you suggest working with volunteers who need access to one or more of your teams or maybe your sites?
You can share your content externally. I strongly recommend you do not use anyone links, because then it's difficult to keep track of what you have shared. That is a security red flag. And once you have shared with an anyone link, anyone can then transfer that file to anyone. So yeah, it's definitely a red flag. But you can share externally, so long as your organization settings are set to do that. And it just looks a little bit different when they click on the link. They're asked to authenticate, and I think they're asked to authenticate and then verify their authentication. And that's if they are external to your organization, and if they are external to Microsoft 365. It looks slightly different if your external user is also using Microsoft 365. It's a little slim, it just cuts out one step for them.
But it doesn't matter if somebody's using a Mac or on Google, they have a Gmail, they can use it as well. Would you recommend, if you have like if you have a big volunteer group, would you recommend making a site that's all of the materials they would need to access?
Yes, we have a client that is primarily made up of volunteers, and yes, there is a site, specifically an internal site as well as an external site that they can use to share documents with the outside world, as well as their internal volunteer department.
So I think we answered the next question a little bit. Someone says, do you have any comments on the experience of OneDrive on a Mac? I find it unpredictable and not as seamless as Dropbox, for example. It's getting better. So now, in fact, earlier today, I actually did some training with a client that they're all using Macs. The only missing step with OneDrive that is available in Windows as opposed to Mac is that there's no backup feature. You can back up, you just have to manually drag into OneDrive the items that you would like to back up. Once items are in that folder, they're in that folder forever until you actually
physically remove them. So yeah, it is still just as stable. It's just that one feature is not available.
Excellent, thanks. So our next question is about multiple platforms. So if you have half of your organization using Microsoft and the other half maybe using Google Drive, does it make sense to migrate as many people as are willing to use Microsoft to SharePoint, even if you know that there are still going to be some people that are on Google?
I think I can help with this one. I think this is very interesting because do you want to live in two worlds, right? In two different worlds, and both of them are exactly the same, because Google offers you some things that are completely similar to SharePoint. So I think the question here is more about, where do you really want to implement a good governance? Where do you really want to make sure that people understand the way to collaborate? Because Google has Google Workspace, so you can make it happen in Google Workspace. You just need to make sure that people knows, and that people is trained, and then everybody is on the same page. That's more like the question here. I mean, you can live in both worlds, but it's not ideal. You're gonna have problems. So that's my answer.
If you're deliberate about it, I think, so you would just know in your training, you know, when you have new staff, are they going to be in one or the other? And then they
Correct.
would get that training, and probably there's a little part of the training that's about collaborating with somebody who's in the other world, right?
Correct. That's the way it is.
All right, we have another question. If the files are not permanently deleted after migration, where are they stored for redundancy? You were talking earlier about the migration when you flip that switch.
I mean, we don't delete it permanently. We just for a short period of time. Those files are going to be gone. The thing is, we keep them alive for some time. The organization can make their own decision how long they want to keep it. Usually they can be 3 months, 6 months, and after that it's gone. Like, there's no more need to keep them, because we already migrate them. Like 100% of those files are migrated. And also when they are migrated, we can back them up. So you can use a backup, from Microsoft solution for backup. So you can back up your files. So you can come back to your files from a year ago, for 2 years ago, from whatever, right? So you don't need to have those files. You can, basically destroy them.
Well, I know that probably freaks a lot of people out, but yes, when you're at that point, you already have them. That brings up a different question for me. Do you recommend that people go through their files ahead of time and like delete the ones that are like 20 years old, or like all of the photos from the gala in 2011 that nobody's ever going to look at again? Or do you tell them to just bring all of the files over and not worry about it?
Well, it's part of their the work process. We are constantly meeting with the department head, in this case, with the department head. And the initial meetings are first identifying where the data is, and then identifying what data should move. During the what data should move is when the organization is also weighing how far back they want to actually move files from. And yeah, that it can be daunting. You can set an arbitrary date, or you can set some more specific guidelines, like what types of files you're going to keep everything of, like finance files, all of it goes. But the website from 1995
ago.
right.
Also,
maybe you don't need it anymore.
Right.
This opened the doors for retention policy. So usually organizations don't think about it, but this is the good time to review your retention policy. How long are you going to keep your files for your organization? How long are you required to keep them? So that is a good starting point for reviewing your retention policy in your organization.
That's great. What did you mean? Here's another question. What did you mean at the beginning when we said that SharePoint is not good at storing large files? And this person says, we have some InDesign files and large photo and film files in SharePoint.
So first I'll address the InDesign. Adobe offers their own cloud solution, which we strongly recommend using for your Adobe files. Large files are not best kept in SharePoint because since they are all located on a website, that requires that you have to download every time you access a file. So, you know, depending on the speed of your internet access, that could, you know, put a damper on your productivity for the day if you have to wait a long time to download a 50 gig document.
Mhm. And there are other products, like you said, that are maybe better suited to larger files. I mean, I think if you've got a few and, you know, it's not something that your nonprofit is, it's not the basis of your nonprofit, then, you know, probably can store a few larger files in. But if you're working with a lot of larger files all the time, SharePoint might not be the best solution.
Right.
Another question, do you recommend users sync SharePoint to File Explorer?
This is a very interesting question. And I mean, we recommend it if the folder and that you are trying to synchronize is not big. Like it's a folder that you work all the time, but it's small, because you got to consider that whatever you sync is going to go into your hard drive. Usually now people don't buy, I mean, organizations are not buying computer with a big hard drive because most of the data is in the cloud. So a 256 gigabytes computer isn't a small computer. Even your phone will have more space than your computer. So if you know that the folder or the site that you're going to synchronize is extremely big, do not recommend synchronizing. It's better to work online, you know, otherwise you're going to crash your computer. Basically, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, good advice. We don't want that.
Mhm.
All right, then the next question is, it's a little bit complicated. I'm going to try and distill it down. So this is a person who had a very small team, and they were using OneDrive for everything, basically just sharing it between two people. So if as they grow in staff, can they migrate that OneDrive folder to a SharePoint site? Like, is it as easy as just taking where everything used to be and moving it over to SharePoint? I assume that they would still need to look at what's in there, and they might want to create different sites based on what the content is. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So actually with our case study company, we are moving that one of their departments that's how they were sharing their content, was from OneDrive, and now they have decided to move all of their documents to SharePoint. We're using the same tools to move it, and the same method, same approach to the migration, where they are deciding what sites they want to create and which files and folders go to which site. And yes, it's the location of where your data is not as much of an issue as just making sure that it all moves.
Exactly. As you grow in staff, you're going to have different permission levels, right? Like when you're a small organization with two people, you probably both can see everything. But as you grow, you're going to want to have those sites that have the different permissions.
Right.
All right, we have a comment that says OneDrive files on demand stops syncing files to HD. That sounds too technical for me. Do you guys want to comment on that?
So there are some limitations I think what I'm answering is what you're asking. There are some limitations. Microsoft has set right now it's at 300,000 files that it will sync. If you're approaching that limit, it will start to slow down. It will stop. It causes problem. So that is what Norwin was referring to when he was saying that, yes, it's a good idea to only sync what you actually need to have on a daily basis. And that goes for your OneDrive files too. There you can certainly archive, as it were, things to the cloud and only have those things available, you know, when you absolutely need them, as opposed to, you know, having everything on your computer.
So I want to thank everyone for coming today, and thank you so much, Robin and Norwin, for just taking us through SharePoint, how it works, and talking to us about this, actual migration that you're in the middle of right now. So we had some great, practitioner experiences that you could share with us, and some tips on the change management as well. I will put all of our answers to all of the questions that came in the transcript. But if you can stay, Robin and Norwin both said that they could stay on for another 5 minutes or so and answer some more questions. So I think actually we have some of these that we already did hit on it. Do you need a dedicated internal SharePoint administrator? If you have SharePoint, we touched on that. You need to have somebody that's very familiar with it and is responsible for it and is given the responsibility and the time to do it. Can I just continue storing everything on my OneDrive? What's the difference between OneDrive and SharePoint? I think we already covered that. So hopefully you have a better understanding of that. How do I share with external people? We covered that as well. You just invite them with the email. You can also, if like we talked about with the volunteers, if you have a large cohort of people that you need to collaborate with outside of your organization, you can create a site that they have permissions to. What's the best way to set up the files in SharePoint? Is there a generic template I can use? I don't think we've hit on that yet. Norwin, do you want to talk about that?
No, I mean, the best way to do it is contact Community IT. We can help you out.
Well, you said something great when we were preparing for this, where you said that the template is your organization. Like our organization needs are going to be so different. There's no one generic way that everyone should always set their files up. That like you did with the Chinatown CDC, you have to like talk to the departments, look through your data, figure out what sites make sense to have permissions for which groups, all of that sort of thing. So
that's correct. Yeah, every organization has their own way of thinking as well. Like they might have exactly the same departments, but they can think differently the way they want to collaborate. So
yeah,
there's no template for this. It's basically we accommodate to your needs and we help you.
exactly. And it's not going to work if it doesn't fit what your organization, like how you think about the work that you do and the departments that you have and the teams that you have.
Correct.
All right. So next question is, how should I manage folder permissions? I think we already hit on that, but we don't recommend setting permissions by folder.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. We don't.
You should set the permissions by the site. So everyone that has access to that site has access to all the folders and all of the documents within those folders.
Exactly.
Correct.
This is a good one. How many sites do I need for a 10 to 15% staff?
I would say let the content direct how many sites you need. If you have extensive HR things, you need an HR site. If you have, finance documents, you need a finance site. Try not to have it depend on a person, because as we all know, staff changes. And if staff has moved and it was dependent on that person's job to manage it, it then becomes, a sticking point to move somebody else into that way of thinking.
Would you say there's any red flags? Like if you're a 5-person organization and you have like 50 sites, is that maybe overcomplicated?
You are over-engineered. One site is generally enough for, yeah.
Okay, so here's a good question. How can I fix the mess after a bad migration? Do I have to just start over?
It certainly can be done. We still approach it the exact same way. Look at the content, figure out, some similarities in your content, decide where things should move to. Yeah, it's still the same approach. It may take a little longer because you're also unwinding a way of thought as well as the actual data, but it certainly can be done.
I think also at that point, you probably want to look at and do some deep thinking as an organization about where the roadblocks came, like, why did you end up with a bad migration or a mess after you migrated, and try to maybe ameliorate some of those issues, can help you figure out how to fix the data that kind of ended up maybe in this crazy system or such. Which there's a great question that just came in. We already have an ad hoc setup in Teams with lots of channels. How can we go backward to sort out our SP sites, SharePoint sites, and implement them like back into Teams? Deleting or changing names of channels in Teams is not easy, and that doesn't transfer directly to SharePoint. So can you talk a little bit? I know I already put in the chat that we have a totally different 1 hour webinar on our site about Teams specifically, and how when you're sharing documents through Teams, you are sharing them through SharePoint, but you may not know it because you're just sharing it, with your colleague through Teams. So you can go back and check that out. But if you have a structure in Teams that is working, do you have advice on going back to SharePoint and kind of making it match what's in Teams?
We actually are recommending that if you are already using Teams, keep using Teams. That seems to be the direction that Microsoft is going in. Teams is right now their kind of pet project. They're certainly, I know if you have used Teams in the recent past, they have, there's multiple versions.
Changing.
Yes, but the SharePoint and the documents stay the same. So that's a good credit to Microsoft that they're keeping the back door and the back end still consistent.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, here's a question. What are storage requirements, and what should I do to get more storage? So we touched on this earlier, but do you want to answer in a little bit more information?
Storage requirements?
Yeah, basically,
Yes.
how do you get more storage? Like, what is storage based on? Is it per user?
So it starts at 1 terabyte per tenant. So when you sign up for Microsoft 365, you get 1 terabyte of data for your organization. Actually, and also you get 1 terabyte of data for each person in OneDrive too. So you're getting a lot of storage. And then, yes, you can purchase additional storage. There's Microsoft 365 add-on, storage add-on. And then you could also do it via adding more types of a license. I think it's the A5, E5, and G5 licenses that afford you more SharePoint data to share as well.
Correct. That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. What are the best ways to get staff up to speed on a SharePoint migration? You want to talk a little bit more about that?
I will say that you should train them. Training and enforcing the way of using things is the best way. Like they're not gonna use it if they're not. And you got to tell them how to do the business, right? This is your organization, and this is the way how you want to make business, on the way that you want to manage your organization. So the first thing you do when they are onboarded, they are new, you gotta, get them into train. And then the people who has been in the organization for a longer time, they're always resistant to change, right? Because they don't want to change the way they do things. But then you got to train them, because usually the resistance comes because they don't know what is coming. So it's better to tell them what is coming, show them the differences, and also the power that they have with this new way of doing things. And then that will help a lot.
Yeah, I think anytime that you're making somebody's job harder, they're going to be resistant. So the more you can show them that this makes it easier to find something, easier to collaborate, and the more automatic you can make it as well. It's like when you hit save, it just automatically goes into your site. That's, like the better. I think for me also, like the first way that you taught me how to do it is the way I'm going to keep doing it. So, and because Microsoft gives you 20 ways to do the same thing, you could have somebody who, like, they're not resistant to using SharePoint per se. It's just that they learned one way to save their documents. So if you do the training of how to save them the way you want them to, they'll start doing that. You know, it's not, you know, like, it's not that they're angry about it. They're just, you know, maybe set in their ways. So.
I would also say that the consistency of the rollout is important. If you're doing this for multiple departments, keeping it consistent, keeping the migration, the training, and the support, the after support consistent is a good method to keep staff up to speed too. Because even though they are part of one department, if they've talked to somebody else in their department, in somebody else's department,
Yeah.
It's good
They're
to
gonna talk.
Yeah.
And that's where I think leadership as well, like, you need to show, if you're if your executive level leaders are not sharing, on the site the way that they're supposed to be, then nobody else is going to either, because there's no leadership there, like showing them that how important it is to the organization. And I think, Norwin, you talked about you can record your training so that that's available later, or so that you have like maybe mini recordings of just how you do this one thing that you forget how to do, and then you can just look at a short recording to remember.
Correct. Yeah, we're basically recording the trainings, and then we place the training into the SharePoint site so they can have the recording in there and use it as any time as they want. And also, if the organization think that there is a need to create something more specific, like how do you do this? Like how do you use OneDrive? How do you use, what's the difference? How do you share a file? You can create mini trainings, like mini 2-minute videos internally with exactly your mock-up of your organization. So you don't need to grab a video from YouTube to share. You can do your own video, like a 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or 1 minute video will be sufficient to help your organization to use SharePoint.
Be consistent. And I really love that idea of getting HR to get involved in it too, for onboarding and like performance reviews as well. So just there are those other checkpoints, because sometimes training like falls entirely on the IT people, and maybe they're not the best trainers all the time. So if you get the people who are involved in the onboarding, like you have all these other trainings that you have to figure out how you get your payroll, you have to, set up this, you have to set up that. And they're used to doing that, and just it's another little unit in there that you take on your first day or second day of like, here's how we save our files. I think that makes a lot of sense too.
Correct.
So our learning objectives for today were to learn about SharePoint and what it can do, learn the steps and best practices for a SharePoint migration project. Thank you guys so much for sharing all of that with us. So this work that you guys are working on right now. And then discuss the change management tips, which thank you both for sharing that with us. I want to make sure to let you know that in July, our CEO, Johan Hammerstrom, and I will be taking your questions on what IT you need as a startup, nonprofit, or as a spinoff. So that's our next monthly webinar. It's something we've been seeing a lot more and more recently, that clients are coming to us as they grow, especially as they spin off maybe a parent organization, a university incubator, or a fiscal sponsor, someone who had been providing IT support. And when your nonprofit decides to go off on your own, how do you detangle that IT support, and how can outsourced IT help you when you have to learn a lot about IT quickly? We're going to talk in that webinar about the decisions you can make to set off on the right foot. So that's going to be July 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern and noon Pacific. And if you happen to be watching on YouTube today, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, so you'll get the updates every time we post a new webinar. And we also invite you to register for an upcoming webinar on our website, because then even if you can't attend, you'll be on the mailing list to get reminders every month. You can register and ask your own questions at registration or in the webinar, and suggest future topics that you'd like to hear about as well. Great. So I don't see any more questions coming in. I want to thank everybody who stuck with us. There were quite a few people who stayed on for an extra 15 minutes. Norwin and Robin, thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise and knowledge with us. I feel like I personally have already learned a whole bunch more about how OneDrive and SharePoint work that I wasn't fully aware of before. So I hope that this webinar has been helpful to others. And I just want to really thank you again for joining us. And thank you everybody who stuck with us. And thank you, Robin and Norman.
Thank you everyone for staying.